Now, for our final video on anchors and cable preparation, I'll return to step 3, unspooling the cable. Remember from the beginning of this lecture series that we talked about how kinks in the cable can be dangerous for you because there is potential energy stored in them that can unravel and cause striking hazards. Well, it's also dangerous for the cable. We don't want any kinks in the cable to form while unspooling it such that the kinks can damage the cable. We also want to keep the cable out of sandy areas, especially if it's just been greased, as the sand will get in between the cable strands. And as the cable is loaded, the abrasion can increase the degradation of the cable and shorten its life. We'll use heavy tie wire around the loose ends to prevent unraveling. We also want to verify that all clamps are drop forged. If you don't know how to do this, get in contact with your country program manager. It's extremely important that all the clamps we use on the main cables are drop forged. Malleable clamps are subject to sudden failure and are much cheaper and made in such a way that impurities can be introduced into the metal. Now, I'll also mention that if cable comes very dry, it may be important part of the process to grease the cable. This depends on the arrival of the cable and warrants discussion with your country program manager. But the earlier we can get grease on the cable, the better, because as we hoist it into the air, it gets exponentially more difficult to get the cables greased. And this is super important to increase the lifetime of the cable and protect it from water damage. Now in step 4A, we'll start by walking the cables across the river and draping them over the abutment. And we want to ensure that the walkway cables are threaded into the walkway hump tubes. Then we'll clamp the cables at the fixed anchor and have a chart here showing spacing and number of clamps per cable diameter. But first we'll have to thread the cables through the plastic tubing at the fixed anchor, and we'll clamp them at the specified spacing and torque shown in the table here and also in the EIA bridge binder. We want to consider threading the cable so that the dead end lies underneath the live end. So the dead end goes on top and around and onto the bottom. And this allows us to have easier access to the nuts on the clamp and makes everything much easier for tightening and loosening clamps, especially on the adjustable side. So we'll want to clamp our cables at the adjustable anchor. So we secure the cables with 2 tightened clamps. Clamps should not yet be fully tightened. On the fixed end, we can tighten them fully. On the adjustable end, we want to leave some play. This is because if we tighten them all the way, it'll kink the cable and then make the threading process in the future much more difficult and potentially dangerous. Then we'll secure the clamp with the U-bolt side of the clamp on the dead end, so never saddle a dead horse, and support the cable with rocks or blocking to ensure the cable is at the proper angle per the drawings. This can be measured ahead of time by pulling a string from the top of the tower to the anchor cage and removing any rocks that may get in the way of the cables before we bring them all the way over. Once again, we want to consider threading the dead end so it lies underneath the live end and the clamp saddle faces upward. The final step is to hand hoist. We'll hand hoist the cable as high as possible while remaining under our construction sag, H1, which is the minimum sag or a 3% sag, so we don't accidentally hoist the cables too high and cause any sudden failure or early failure of the anchor. We also want to set aside 4 clamps to be used throughout the construction process. These are clamps that will be used and reused for different construction tasks. We want to make sure they don't get mixed up with the clamps that are going to be put on the anchor and not used again, so that we can make sure that these clamps are pristine. Finally, here's a photo of the quality control form for anchor and cable preparation. Remember that the photo icons indicate QC photos are required, and the little pencils indicate some sort of as-built verification in which we need to take down some dimensions or elevations.